Hey folks, welcome to week 8 of GID 109 Intro to Web Design. How's everybody doing? Hope you're plugging along, doing okay, taking care of yourself. All right, so what are we doing in week 8? Let's take a look at our modules. And we'll go over here to module 8. Take a look at what's on the agenda. Okay, so this week we are, of course, still working on Project 1, your real-life redesign of a website. So far you guys have identified a real-life website that you think needs a complete overhaul and that can be done better. And so you made your initial assessments, pointing out what you think can be done better. And then you did sort of the first major steps in our web design workflow, which was doing a needs assessment, which is a much more detailed assessment of what could be done better, what are the client's needs, a little assessment of their competition as well as their customers, who their demographic is, and basically how you can improve the website for the needs of both the client and the customer. So that's done. Then you did some initial sketches, just some rough sketches on paper, just to get some of the ideas out of your head down onto paper. So that was your first deliverable. Then your second deliverable was you created a series of wireframes, either on paper or in Adobe Illustrator, just making simplified, basic versions of the web pages that you are redesigning, using just simple geometric shapes, some stand-in typography, basic black and white colors, nothing super fancy. Just we went over what the idea of wireframes are, what their purpose are in the world of rapid prototyping, and how those wireframes can then be used as a means of assessment in usability testing, which is what you went out and did next. You gathered together a few people, either in person or remotely, and had them try to complete some basic tasks in your website using your wireframes by simply pointing to different aspects of the wireframes and going through some of those simple tasks that you assign them. So that's your second deliverable, the wireframes and the user testing. So now that that's all done, based on the feedback you got from your usability testing, you probably went and made some adjustments to your wireframes, maybe rethought some of your design choices, some of your user experience choices in terms of how you expect them to navigate their way around the pages. So now it's time to get into Adobe XD and start building our visual prototype of our website. So we're going to do that starting now, this week, and maybe you've dived into it a little bit already. Certainly by now, you already went through the Adobe XD tutorials that were introduced at the beginning of the semester. Hopefully you've been practicing with the software, getting to know Adobe XD, maybe even made a couple of small basics, page designs or whatnot, just to really get used to the software. So I really hope you've been practicing with it. Now today we're going to go through basically some production steps. Now these are suggestions. So you can see here in the Week 8 overview, there is a PDF you can download entitled Production Steps. We're going to take a look at that. And then this is going to give you the basis to sort of start working on your third deliverable, which is the actual design and prototype of the website in Adobe XD. And of course, there are a couple of other elements included in this deliverable. We'll get to those in a second. So let's take a look at this production steps handout, which we can find right here. So again, it's website design, Adobe XD prototype production steps. Now, I want you to consider this sort of a suggestion of the order of things that you should do. Now, you can ad lib a little bit. You can come up with your own sort of way of doing this. Again, maybe you've been practicing with XD for a while. Maybe you're familiar with XD. Maybe you have a certain way of doing this, and that's fine. But this is just sort of like my suggestion as to the order in which you should do this. And this is sort of good best practices for setting up a website, whether you're designing a prototype in XD, whether you're designing a functioning site in something like Adobe Dreamweaver, or whether you're going to hand code a site from scratch. All of these steps are generally a good idea to do to get the ball rolling and to plan out sort of a lot of your production of the site. Okay? All right, so let's go through this together. So now that you've completed your usability testing from your wireframes, you're going to plan, design, and prototype your site in Adobe XD. Here are some basic production steps to follow. These are good best practices for any web design project. You might have also realized by now that Adobe XD is not the only prototyping tool in town. There is, of course, a program called Sketch, which predates Adobe XD, which is a very similar tool and works equally as well. Before the existence of Adobe XD, a lot of web designers would use a program called Adobe Muse to create both prototypes and functioning websites. Adobe recently, in the past couple of years, though, did decide to discontinue discontinue the use of Muse and focus more on XD and similar software solutions. Of course, even further back than that, website prototypes, non-functioning prototypes, just visual prototypes, have been created in both Illustrator and Photoshop for a long time. XD is probably the better solution in that it allows you to create visual prototypes, but also allows you to create links and actually have it function in a way that can be shared with other people to really sort of test out the functionality, the user experience choices, and the user interface choices. So that's why we're going with XD. But again, you could also do similar things in a program called Sketch. And if we were doing this out in the world, you might actually be working for a place that uses Sketch as opposed to XD. At this point, they're both sort of industry standard. Okay, so the first thing, original inspiration and planning. So get together your original rough sketches, those ones you did on paper, from Deliverable 1. Have those handy, just for reference. And of course, have your final wireframes that you decided upon after your usability testing. Not the first wireframes you did, but if you made any changes to them after you got your feedback from your user testers, have those handy too, whether they're on paper or whether they are digital, either way. So just have those nearby, okay? So for example, I have my wireframes here. Here's one of my wireframe pages that I did in Adobe Illustrator. So now I sort of have the basic layout of my home page. I know what my sort of shapes and margins and gutters and alleys are going to look like, and what my various elements are, from my header to my footer to my navigation system to my 3 content containers and so on and so forth. I just did it all in black and white shades of gray. Pretty simple. Used the guides and just made some basic shapes using rectangles, rounded rectangles, etc. So you have your wireframes handy. This happens to be the one I'm going to be working with, okay? All right, next. Image collection. So before we even start building anything, you should really get together all of the images that are going to appear in your website redesign, in this case, or in any case, a website design. Now, of course, images can come from a variety of places. Now, out in the real world, of course, you as the web designer would not really be the same person who's collecting the images. There would be a creative director or an art director who would oversee either purchases of stock photography or the employment of an actual photographer who would go out and shoot photographs, or it would come from a collection of pre-existing photos from the client. Either way, it would come from other sources other than yourself. But here in school, when we're working on web design projects, we are responsible for coming up with the images. And so you have a few options. For one thing, if you want to go with stock photography, I recommend these 3 locations, and you might be familiar with them: Unsplash, Pixabay, or Pexels. And so we'll take a look at them here. This is Unsplash, this is Pixabay, and this is Pexels. Now, both Unsplash and Pexels deal with just stock photography, and Pixabay deals with not only stock photography, but as you can see here from the list, they also have vector graphics and illustrations, things that can be opened up in Adobe Illustrator, and they even have stock videos to choose from. So they have a pretty good collection. Now, Pixabay, you do have to create a free account to use it, but both Unsplash and Pexels you can use just by navigating to it. Now, all 3 of these are free to use for non-commercial purposes of stock photography. They fall into the Creative Commons licensing system, which you may have learned about in some other classes, but basically as students they are free to use for you. So of course, depending on what you're looking for, you can find photos of all sorts of things. So for my particular website redesign that I'm doing here in my example, I am doing a donut shop. And so I just type in donuts and I can get all sorts of great photography of donuts, which would come in handy. And so you can collect these and start making a folder full of the photos that you think are going to work. So if I wanted this one, for example, from Unsplash, you can simply click on it. It shows you an enlarged preview. And then you go over here to download free and you choose your size from the pull-down menu. It's generally a good idea to grab the largest sized one you can, because we are going to want to crop and resize and optimize our image for the web. So you should start out with a larger image just so you can have it. And furthermore, in projects, you might need that image for print projects later on that are related to the same client. And so why wouldn't you start with the largest resolution picture you can get? Now notice in Unsplash, once you're done downloading it, see it downloaded over here to my downloads folder, it gives you a little attribution box that pops up. and says, hey, you should thank the photographer, because remember, this is free stock photography, so it would be nice to go back and thank the photographer. This here is Anne Sullivan. You can send her an email or give her a little shout out on social media and just say, hey, love your photo, thank you for letting me use it. But more importantly, for educational purposes, you're going to want to cite where your photographs come from. So in just sort of a running Word document, or a Google Docs or whatnot, you're going to keep a running list of where all your photos come from. You're going to cite them just like you would sources in a research paper. So Unsplash is great and super helpful because at the bottom here, the citation is already written for you. All you have to do is click the copy to clipboard button, and now I have it, and I can paste that into a Word document or whatever and keep a running tally of where my pictures come from. Pexels does a similar thing, and Pixabay as well, so certainly be sure to cite where these things come from, okay? And like I said, Pixabay also handles not just photography, but if you go up here to the sort search, you can choose, say, vector graphics, and now I can get vector illustrations of various things related to donuts, because donuts are delicious. So anyway, you can get all that stuff. And notice when you get a vector, let's say I wanted to use this vector graphic, see the transparency in the background. When you go over to free download here in the world of Pixabay, it gives you choices not only as PNGs, which of course supports transparency as pixel-based images, but I can download an actual vector graphic, which I can open right up in Adobe Illustrator, and therefore alter it, make changes to it the way that I would any other vector graphic. Okay, so make yourself a nice pile of imagery, things that are related to what you're doing. Now, other places you can get it aside from stock photography and graphics. Remember, we're talking photographs, illustrations, graphics, pretty much whatever is going to be appropriate for your website. Now, of course, if you're redesigning an existing website, which we are here, you can also collect images from the original site, right? Just so long as that they are of good quality. So make sure that you are, right-clicking on the images that exist in the original website, downloading them, but then bring them into Photoshop and see how big they are. Make sure that they're of good quality in terms of not only size and pixel density, but also just visually, do they look good? So you're going to have to make that judgment on your own if you can reuse some of those. Excuse me. And of course, you are welcome to include any of your own original images as well, so long as they are appropriate for the site. So if you want to shoot your own photographs, create your own illustrations, I would certainly never stop you from doing that. Just make sure they're appropriate for the site, and of course, they're also good quality. So once you've collected your images, put them into a folder. So here is my collection of images that I have for my donut website, right? I grabbed a bunch that could be useful. I have this one here, this one here, this one here, some good-looking donuts, all good-looking stuff. And so now that I have those, the one that I just downloaded a second ago, I can pick that up from my downloads folder and drop that off too here in my collection. So now I've got another one. So make yourself a little folder full of all of your images, graphics, vectors, whatever you got, and just have those ready to rock and roll. Okay, now, next, we're going to prepare our images. Now, just because we downloaded a bunch of photos from the internet, or you shot them yourself, or even if you got them off the original website, doesn't mean that they're ready to be put into a website or to be prototyped. You have to sort of optimize them for web consumption. One of the biggest mistakes people make in using imagery in their websites is they don't optimize them. And so in doing so, you could have a photo that is too large in terms of file size, and that causes the load time of the website to slow down. Nobody wants a slow website. And even if it's only seconds, in terms of increasing or decreasing the load speed, when you're talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 photographs on a given website, that all adds up and can slow down the load of the website a lot. And remember, we kind of live in a mobile-first society, so most people are accessing websites on the go, more so than they would be on desktops, and there's a good chance that they're accessing your website not using a Wi-Fi connection, which slows down the load time even more. So the point is, you want to optimize your photography. Now, this is not a Photoshop class, so we're not going to get into it too deeply, but here is some basics about it. So you can do this in either Photoshop for pixel-based images or Illustrator for vector-based images, and you're going to want to optimize all of your images for the web using the built-in Image Ready function that is in both programs. You simply go to File, Export, Save for Web and Legacy, and then you can make some adjustments and turn it into either web-ready JPEGs, PNGs, or even GIFs, whatever you think is appropriate. Now, if you want to learn more about this, you may have already learned about optimizing images for the web in a previous class, but if you did not, this link right here takes you to this handy guide right here, all about optimizing images for the web, a practical guide. This walks you through the steps on how to do that and talks about different file types with different options, everything from web-ready JPEGs to PNGs to GIFs and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty useful and helpful article. Be sure to read through that if you don't already know how to optimize images for the web. So check that out, see how that goes for you. Okay, next, you're going to need your collection of copy. Now it says here copy collection. That doesn't mean copy and paste your collection of photographs. It means that you need a collection of written words that are going to be on your website, right? The copy, the words, the headlines, the body copy, you name it. Now, of course, if you're redesigning a website, you can certainly just open up a word processing document, whether you want to work in Microsoft Word, Google Docs, Apple Pages, whatever you're comfortable with. Just copy and paste the pre-existing content from the website you're redesigning. The headlines, the paragraphs, the lists, the descriptors, whatever you need. Just start getting them into a word processing document so you can have them. Make sure that you unformat them, okay? Up at the top of Microsoft Word, so you can click the unformat button, looks like an eraser, and that'll take away all the formatting from the text so that you're not carrying over any of that into your document, okay? So collect all of the written copy you need. Now, of course, in web design in general, this could be original writing, like maybe you have received a manuscript of writing from whoever the web writer is for the project. It could be temporary type. You could be using lorem ipsum just to be a placeholder. Maybe you're using real headlines or real category descriptors, but your paragraphs and your lists are just lorem ipsum. Either way, it's up to you. Now, if you need to generate some lorem ipsum, if you want to create a bunch of lorem ipsum to use, of course, you can go here to the lorem ipsum generator. This is a great website. I linked to it in the guide. And this explains what lorem ipsum is, but it also gives you a chance to create paragraphs, single words, or lists based on lorem ipsum. So if you needed a list, for example, and you wanted a list of, say, 12 items, you can simply check off list, say 12 items, hit generate, and then it gives you a bunch of bulleted items as a list that you can then simply copy paste into your Word document. If you need paragraphs of lorem ipsum, just simply hit paragraphs, tell them how many paragraphs you would like, and again, generate, and there you go, 5 paragraphs. Super useful. I usually keep a Word document like this one, just full of lorem ipsum, hanging around just so I can use it for placeholder. And you'll notice that this is not formatted. It's just standard Times New Roman 12 black on a white background. So I can format it later in Adobe XD or whatever program I am using. So this is just sort of like a bunch of text I just have. So this can either be real text, lorem ipsum, whatever you want. Remember, if you're copying and pasting in text from the original site, once you paste it in, you're going to want to highlight all of it and then go up here in Microsoft Word to the Clear All Formatting button, and that will simply remove all the formatting and just push it back to whatever the standard formatting is, which in this case is Calibri 11 black on white background. And you can clean it up a little bit by removing extra returns or whatever you want. So just have this ready to rock and roll so you can use it in your website design. Okay, next. So once you've copied all your collection, the next thing we're going to do is you're going to make kind of a mood board, as it were, right? Or a style guide or a visual library. So we're going to decide on our colors and our fonts, as well as pick out some sort of inspirational photographs from the collection of photos that we just created, that we just downloaded and collected. So you're going to create the style guide or visual library of all the visual elements that are going to be used in your website design. Now, maybe not every single photograph, you have those in your folder, but we want to put some photos in there for inspiration. So essentially, from your color palette to font choices to graphics, images, and icons, we want to have everything in this sort of mood board so that when it comes time to design it in in XD, we're ready to go. We have this to refer to. We can sample our colors. We know our RGB formulas. We know what our font choices are. We don't have to stop and figure it out. You just have it ready to go. Now, you might have learned about style guides or visual libraries or even mood boards in other classes. So however you choose to make this is entirely up to you, whatever works for you. But I'm going to just sort of show you an example. And I explain here the way in which to build the example. So I like to use Adobe Illustrator for this because it is a vector-based program, of course, and so is Adobe XD. So they copy and paste to each other really easy. You can even drag and drop elements from Illustrator over to XD, so it's all very compatible that way. So in Illustrator, create a nice large artboard and place and embed 4 to 6 of your favorite images from the collection of photos that you got, right? So about 4 to 6 will do. These are really just for inspiration, right? And we're going to draw things from these photos, particularly our colors. Then you're going to create 4 to 6 1-inch squares. They can be whatever size you want, but 1-inch squares are good. And then using the eyedropper tool in Illustrator, start pulling some colors that you like from those photographs, from those graphics, from those illustrations, whatever you have in there, from those images, and fill each of the squares. Play around and explore with different combinations of colors until you're really happy with the palette that you're creating, right? So make sure that you have one really dark color, not necessarily black, and one really light color, not necessarily white, to use where you're going to need some high contrast in your design, right? When you're doing paragraphs of type, for example, you're going to want that in a very dark color on a high contrast background. So try to grab a nice black, a nice dark color that's not necessarily black. It could be black, but don't feel like you have to use black and white. Next, in the same artboard, you're going to create some typographic samples and try to focus on things like what type choices will you make for a headline, for a subheadline, for your body copy, if you're going to use some lists, just so you have some examples. Decide on the fonts for each, but try to limit yourself to only 2 or 3 fonts, and of course make sure that each font you're choosing has some good font style choices, right? And you've probably learned about this in your typography class, so I'm not going to go into it too deeply. But you definitely want to limit your number of fonts, but have some good styles to choose from. Be sure to name the font next to each sample so you remember what you chose. Yes, I know you could click on it and look it up in the pull-down menu, but why not just have the name there? Now, I just want to give you an example of what this mood board could look like, or style guide. So here's one I created for my donut website. You'll see here that I have some photos on the left from my photo collection, the ones that I really like the best. And using the eyedropper tool, I filled these squares over here with colors that I pulled directly from the photographs. And then, it took me a little while to play around with it and come up with a combination of colors that I really liked that creates a nice palette that has some contrast. So here's my really dark color. It's this sort of really dark, like reddish plum color. Here's my really light color. It's kind of like this light taupey color. And then I've got some colors in between, kind of a lighter plum, a bluish gray, kind of a dusty pink, and kind of this blue-green color. So once I was happy with that, then I went ahead and picked out my fonts, right? This is alternate Gothic, Avenir Medium, Avenir Book, and Avenir Light. So I stuck with just 2 fonts, right? Alternate Gothic for my headlines, but then I decided to stick with Avenir for everything else, but just use different type styles to delineate the various usages. So for the subheadline, we got Medium. For the body copy, we got Book. And if I'm going to put any lists into my website, we're going to go with Light. And I just sort of placed this in like a dark gray color. Obviously, I can employ these colors later on in the website any way that I want for the type. Now, you'll notice I also have here some graphics. This is a logo that I created for the donut business, right? So you'll see over here is where I created the logo in this other Illustrator document. So this is the original logo that I created. But I just did it in these colors right off the bat. But then after I went back and made my style guide and formed my color palette from my photographs, I now had to sort of rethink the logo to try to apply this color palette to it. So then I just sort of made a second version of the logo, a duplicate of it, and applied that color palette to it so that it makes more sense along with this. So notice how everything fits together nicely. And then you can include what other graphics you want here that makes sense. I went and found a nice collection of vector icons and picked out ones that I think would be useful for the website, since this is going to be a donut business. I got some things that were related to food service, but also some typical things like icons for, calling them or chatting with them online, your shopping basket, informational stuff. Maybe people want to favorite a donut flavor. Now, just because you put together this mood board or style guide doesn't mean you have to use every single thing that's here when you're actually designing the website. But this is just like your palette of things to pick from and gives you a really good place to start from your design. Okay, so put this together and then you've moved on to the next step. Okay, so once we've got our style guide, our mood board, our visual library, whatever you want to call it, ready to rock and roll, the next thing you want to do in terms of things to do before we even get into Adobe XD is you're going to prepare your file folders. Now, this is kind of like the non-sexy part of this because, we're organizing file folders. But it's really important. In the world of web design, having good organized files will make your life a lot easier and guarantees that your web files will be uploaded to the various places they need to go in a way that makes sense. Plus, it's a good best practice to get into because website file structures have to be organized a certain way. Otherwise, web browsers will not read things properly. Okay, so we'll get more into that as we go along. But this is just a good way to sort of get into that habit. So it's time to get organized, right? Create a new folder and name it for the project and or client that you're working on. Inside that folder, you're going to create a folder named Site and another folder named Production. Now, these are two sides of the same coin. In the Site folder is going to go everything that you need when you're actually building the site, okay? So we're going to start out, of course, with our XD file as well as an images folder. But then as the site gets built out more and more, you'll have other things in there. Meanwhile, the production folder is the folder that stays with you the whole time. That never gets uploaded anywhere, but that is all the stuff you need to build all the assets for your site. So in the site folder, you're going to create a folder named Images. Place all of your optimized images in that folder. Not your original images, but the ones that you just got through optimizing in Photoshop or Illustrator. Put those into the Images folder that's inside the Site folder. Then you're going to place your collection of copy in the Production folder, as well as anything else that you think falls under Production. Any original items, copy or images goes in Production, while all optimized images go under Site. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. So let's go back here. So here's kind of my folder structure. So this is the folder that I made, right? And the name of my website is Don's Delectable Donuts, right? And then inside here, there's my production folder and there's my site folder. Notice that the site folder has an images folder inside of it. And I'm going to put all my images in here that I will have optimized from Photoshop. I haven't got around to optimizing them yet, but I will, and they'll all go in there. Meanwhile, over in production, I have all the items I need for production, including the original images that I downloaded, as well as my logo, the Illustrator file of my logo, all my lorem ipsum text, that style guide that I just made, and even my wireframes that I can refer back to for structure. Okay, so now that you've got all that done, it's time to hop into Adobe XD. So I'm going to stop here, and you guys are going to go do all this preparatory stuff first and get ready for building your site in XD. Once you're done with that, come back and watch the second video that's in this same week here, and then we'll dive into getting it set up in Adobe XD, which is page 2 of this production steps, okay? All right, so go ahead and do that, and I'll talk to you soon.